I have a long question here, so I'm just going to read parts of it. Hi Kim, I've got a question on dealing with a certain trauma. Recently I've come to realize that most of my life I've actually been dealing with a fear of extremes and/or intensity, mostly in a circumstantial sense, and it's actually created a pattern in my mind which brings up sometimes intense anxiety every time I come across a situation which feels unnecessarily dramatic. For example, intense arguing between family or people in general. And I'll at times hear my little brother or sister crying very dramatically, and it seems to trigger a very tense emotional response in my mind and body. And then it describes how the person in middle school had a fear of very big things. And about 2 years later, I believe I transcended that fear, and it then shifted into a fear of infinity, which was seemingly more terrifying, while also incredibly interesting to me. I found myself meditating a couple of times around that time on the idea of infinite potential of what an individual could experience. And I remember clearly that at one point I felt to have crossed some kind of threshold while meditating on that, and I actually physically felt some kind of burst in the very center of my brain, which sounds very New Age, I know. But after that, I'd felt some kind of warm, gassy or liquid substance expand slowly from that center point and eventually dissipated. I was very shook from that experience because I felt I damaged something or that I'd gone too far. But I'm very sure that that experience allowed me to also get past that fear of extremes of infinity. And lastly, I believe after that experience, I unlocked some kind of belief system that now has caused me to have a hyperactive nervous system. And then it says, I assume the fear of extremes is pretty common in a lot of people, considering most of us grew up with parents who come to be pretty impatient of the childlike perspective we all had as children. I was wondering if you know of any practice people with this fear of extremes could do to somewhat directly give acknowledgement to the fear itself and transmute it into a positive platform for growth. And if you could also shed some light on the fear itself, and if you've had experiences or struggles with it. Okay, so I think there are two things that we're dealing with here. First, there is this fear of the extreme or very intense or dramatic situations. And this is pretty common in people who have been exposed to trauma. And as I explained in many videos, this might not be in this lifetime. It could be a trauma in a past life. So when you hear somebody saying that if the family is arguing, I have a very intense emotional response, this is typical for trauma. So I think you simply need to pursue healing from that trauma. As I've explained it, there are two aspects of this. First of all, there's the energy that is intensifying the trauma, because what the person is describing here is typically the outer situation triggers an emotional response, which means your emotional body is now flooded with this energy that's stored there, that's normally below the conscious level, but all of a sudden it rises to the conscious level and it pulls on your conscious mind. So I have a playlist about spiritual tools, or spiritual toolbox, where I talk about how you can invoke light from the Ascended Masters. There are other ways to deal with this energy, but this is what I have found most effective, to dissipate the energy. And if you dissipate that energy, so it's not as intense, your reaction will not be as intense. Then, of course, the next step is to look for the subconscious selves that you created in that trauma. And this could go all the way back to your coming to Earth as an avatar. I explained this in my Avatar Psychology playlist. So I would certainly recommend you watch that playlist. So I think this is the one aspect of the problem, which is simply trauma. I mean, simply. It's always difficult to deal with trauma. But it is, I think it's just a typical trauma response. You have experienced trauma in a past life, it's triggered by what happens in these situations, and you can learn to deal with it. Now, the other thing that I think is going on in the question is this fear of infinity, because I can recognize for myself what the person is talking about. I remember as a child, I would just lie down, close my eyes, and I'd have the sense that my body would expand and expand and expand. I mean, it would be first much bigger than my physical body, then bigger than the Earth, then bigger than the solar system, then almost infinite in size. And I had this sense that I was part of this much larger body. And I even had the thought sometimes that what if or what even the Earth here, is just like one cell in this larger body, just like I have one little teeny cell in my hand that's part of my body. And what if that larger body died? Then our universe would disappear, just like one cell would die if my body died. And so that gave me that fear of this expansion. And then when I was in my early 20s, I took this meditation course, 4 months meditation course, and especially towards the end, we had these meditation techniques we were using, and I can recognize this feeling that a person describes, this gasy or liquid in the center of the head. I think you will probably find that this relates to the pituitary gland. No, the pineal gland. And you can look that up, pineal gland. There's various information on it. I'm not really an expert on it. But what I felt during this meditation course was this sense of something dripping. This was more in the back of my mind, my mouth, than in the center of the head. But it was this warm liquid dripping. And they called it soma. But I also recognized this throughout my life, and also in the meditation course and even later. It's like your normal state of mind. You have a certain sense of identity, certain sense of who you are. And it makes you feel relatively safe and secure. But as I've explained, this sense is in the outer personality, the 4 levels of the mind, the identity, mental, emotional, and physical. This is our sense of who we are. We are familiar with it. It gives us that sense of security. But the core of our being, as I've explained, is the conscious you, which is really pure awareness. It isn't the outer personality, which means the conscious you can step outside the normal personality. And when we step outside, especially the first times this happens to us, it's like we sense that there is something outside our own minds that is infinitely bigger than ours. I won't say it's infinite. It isn't really infinite. But it feels so big compared to our normal sense of identity that it seems infinite. And I remember the first times that happened to me, it was, I won't say it was necessarily scary. Well, it was in a sense, because I remember it was like, what happens if I just go into this? Do I disappear? And I think this is what many people have experienced as part of the whole non-duality phenomenon, where they talk about this sense of no self, this sense of oneness with the all. Many mystics throughout the ages that have this sense of oneness with something infinitely bigger than your own mind. And I remember in the beginning, and even as a child, that it could feel scary, because I could have this thought. It was like you're standing in front of an abyss, a very deep gorge. You can't see the bottom of it. And it's like, what happens if you just let yourself fall in? Do you disappear? Do you disappear? That's the fear that I can recognize in myself. I don't know if that's exactly what the person felt, but I certainly recognize this. It's like, once you experience, you go outside your normal identity and you connect to something much bigger. If you let yourself go into this, do you disappear? And that is scary, because it's sort of, I talked about a little bit before, I think, where the fear of death, for most people, it's really associated with the physical body. When you're a spiritual person, I don't fear death, because I know that the death of my physical body, I will survive and go on in another form. But I can identify, when I was younger, I had this fear of the disappearance of myself as an individual being. What if I just disappeared? That my consciousness, my awareness was snuffed out. So that's scary. And I think I think there are many mystics over the ages who have had those experiences and been scared by it. And some people have even pulled back from mysticism. There are even, it's actually some people who have described this, how they had this mystical experience and they were so scared by it that they pulled back from it for a long time. And what I have found myself is that this is a beginner's phenomenon. Because when you are very identified with your normal sense of identity, and then the conscious you steps outside of that for the first time and connects to something greater, then the contrast is so big that you can become scared of what is this infinite space. What if I just disappear into it? What will be left of me? And as I've talked about before, that's why, going back throughout the ages, they're always talking about a path, a gradual path. And what you see in some of these new non-duality, neo-Advaita, is they're talking about, oh, an instant awakening. You can instantly wake up. And yes, you can have various awakening experiences. But first of all, they are not the final experience. You're never going to have a final experience, certainly not while you're on Earth. But what happens to many people, and this is actually what happened to me during this meditation course, is that if you have too dramatic of an experience of going outside your normal sense of identity, when you come back, it can be so big of a contrast that you're not sure what is real anymore. Was the infinity real? Was your normal sense of identity real? And it can become very difficult to function in your normal state of mind. And this, I believe, has happened to many, many people. Not just in non-duality, it's happened to many people who have walked the spiritual path throughout the ages. And that's why, I would recommend, and many people recommend, follow a gradual path. So you gradually shift your identity. Because what I have found is very simple. The first times I had these dramatic experiences of going out of my body, out of my normal sense of identity, it is a very big contrast because I had no sense that there was anything in this infinite space. It's like I said, you're standing in front of this abyss, you can't see the bottom. What if you just fall into it? What's going to happen? Are you going to disappear? And what started happening over time, especially after I found the Ascended Master teachings, was that I started experiencing that there was something in this infinite space. And that something is my higher self, what I call the I Am Presence, and the Ascended Masters. So in other words, there is no infinity. Okay? I know this will be disputed by many people in the non-duality movement, but there is no infinity. There is something that we can experience as infinity because it's a big contrast to our normal state of awareness. If you have lived your whole life inside a little prison cell and you're suddenly let out, it can feel very disorienting that there's all this space. And this is what happens to us. But when you get more used to the experience, you begin to see that in what first felt like infinity, there is your higher self, there's the Ascended Masters. And that means that now, instead of going into infinity and feeling disconnected from your normal sense of self, you go into a larger space than your own sense of self, but you begin to connect to something in that space. So, what I'm saying is, at first, I felt connected to my normal sense of identity. Then I went into a space where I lost that connection, but there was nothing. Gradually, I started connecting to something in the larger space, namely my I Am Presence and the Ascended Masters. And ever since then, I've been on this gradual path of increasing, expanding that sense of connection. So, what I would basically say is, I understand why you can feel a fear of infinity. I think many spiritual people, many mystics, many people who had mystical experiences have experienced that. But the only way out of it, the person is asking if I'm aware of any practice or meditation. If you know of any practice people with this fear of extremes could do to somewhat directly give an acknowledgement to the fear itself and transmute it into a positive platform for growth. And that's what I'm just describing. You need to become aware that there's something beyond your own mind that is real, your higher self and the ascended masters. And then you need to go through the process that I've gone through and that I describe in many of my videos of establishing a sense of connection and expanding that connection. It's like throughout the ages, what people have described, behind all the outer religions, but what mysticism or spirituality in its pure form describing is a process of raising awareness. And at the lower stages, that process is overcoming the identification with a separate self, which is what I've talked about, the identity, mental, emotional, and physical bodies we're identified with. So you overcome this identity that you are a physical, material human being. You disconnect from that. But it's not the goal at the higher levels of awareness that you go into nothing or infinity or no self or no personality, no individuality. The goal is, as I've explained, below the 48th level of consciousness, we are into separation, the illusion of separation. Above it, we attain a certain vague sense of connection to something outside our own minds. And the whole purpose of going up from that level to the highest level we can attain on earth is to expand our sense of connection to our higher self and to the ascended masters that our higher self is an extension of. We're all extensions of the Creator's being in this hierarchy, these many, many levels of self-aware beings that extends from us, we are at the lowest level of the world of form, to the Creator. And the whole purpose of spiritual growth is to increase our sense of connection with that hierarchy. It's not the purpose to go into some kind of infinity where there's no self and we're not connected to anything. Nothingness is not the highest state we can attain. Connectedness to everything, to the whole, is the highest state.